Okay, so those of you who are strong, especially if you have strong faith, I think you see people with strong faith, and they're able to discern. And this is another big question: the voice of God from the fake voice of God, or the beamed-in voice of God.
Yeah, and that's the problem. That on the one hand, faith does provide a solid foundation for a person not to stray from, but these new voice of God weapons, that you can imagine how useful in war that would be. You know, all it commands you to lay down your arms, and you hear this inside your head.
Right.
And of course, it's the way God would talk to you. And so, in a way, faith is a double-edged sword. It can make people believe they're talking to an angel, demon, a god, using these weapons, or it can also ground them more to make sure that they're not tricked into doing the devil's work, so to speak.
I got to warn them every day out there, because we are, as much a spiritual broadcast as anything. But today we really want to get into this. We really want to bring people up to date as to what they can do, so they can then prepare themselves. I've been on all kinds of sites lately where I've seen things like tinfoil blankets and tinfoil hats, believe it or not, and I know maybe it'll help, but I think in a way, gosh, I see a lot of people going to great lengths, almost insane lengths, to keep this stuff out of their rooms, out of their apartments, out of their houses. It can drive a person to doing things that make him look mentally unstable.
And that's the problem, Jeff. A tinfoil hat, the only thing it's going to help you get is a psychiatric diagnosis.
Exactly. And there are other sites that say, look, if you've got this problem, if you're being electronically harassed or, gang stalked on any level, whether from, other human beings to electronic, it all kind of goes together. Because I have been a victim of this myself, and I've been public about it. But there's two schools of thought. One, you be public about it, and that's a good way to get yourself tossed in the loony bin. Of course, I've already been tossed in there, so it's like that was, when I first when I first became aware of organized stalking, I was like 17 years old. Okay, and it was happening then in a more concrete way. I'd say more the gaslighting type way. Okay, and two times. One time I wound up in an overdose in the hospital on where I was given LSD and phenobarbital after I was flipping out from the LSD, and then phenobarbital, and then wound up in a coma. And my heart actually stopped. I came back, but it was, and who was doing it? These were people at in the school that I was going to, and some kids that were there as students, and one particular teacher. This had to do with, it's a long story. I can't go into it now. Another time for that testimony. I don't want to take away from this show. The point is it happened to me, and I guess I was targeted for death. I was targeted to be in the mental hospital and then death. You know what I'm saying? I had both. I'm suicidal. I was listed as a suicide. And then actually in the city where I, grew up in L.A., I went back years and years later, had a long history of having to be dealt with by shrinks and all kinds of, I was a complete mess. But anyway, when I got back there and I ran into, say, an old friend, they said, "You're supposed to be dead. I thought you were dead. We all knew you died then." So after that, the rumor went around that I had died. I didn't make it out of that hospital. Okay, that's pretty.
I get a lot of emails from victims who are correspondents that think they're being targeted with the purposes of death. And yes, some TIs do commit suicide to get away from their torture. But all in all, and we'll get Dr. Duncan's take on this, I really don't think that anyone is being specifically targeted with the expectation of them being killed. And mainly because this is experimentation, and dead guinea pigs aren't good to experiment on.
In my case, I don't think it was back then. It was, what's really interesting? The other thing is that I knew all about, a Dr. West, because I had to do back then. You know what I mean? He was kind of part of this whole plot. But anyway, that was a long time ago. Yeah. That was a long time ago. He was the head of the neuropsychiatric, or NPI, at UCLA at the time.
That's right, Jolie West. He was very much involved in all of this.
Yeah, and one of So it's another story. I wanted to throw it out there to get your take on it. It's a horrible thing. I want to ask you one other thing for either one of you. There was a time in 2004, I believe, I was getting voice to skull, and I know who was doing it. It was someone doing it in a nearby house, and it was the Navy fight song. And the guy worked for Naval Intelligence, or was just retired supposedly from Naval Intelligence. Do you find that to be of any significance?
Here's my take on that. Almost everybody that I've interviewed that has voice to skull believes that it's coming from their neighbors.
Okay.
And so just using some street smarts, I would say that that's a trick. They want you to believe that it's a localized system. But while you were getting it, I bet you could jump on an airplane and fly randomly to another location, and you'd still be getting the voice to skull. So I think the neighbor is just a point of trickery, and that it's not a localized weapon like that.
It's just a guess. I mean, I guessed, that was my guess. It wasn't that, and I'll tell you this, I couldn't get away from it, and it went on for about, a couple of weeks, maybe a little longer, and then it went away. And I haven't had it since, but I'm just saying that was pretty bad because, like I say, it was pretty loud. You know what I mean? It wasn't like, it was very annoying. Put it that way, and distracting. And if this went on day after day, it would drive you completely nuts.
Oh yeah,
I've heard from multiple victims in New Mexico that are hearing music and hearing the Navy fight song specifically. So I think that is part of an operation that's being done there.
Wow.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. John, for that, because I carried that since 2004, and I didn't know what to. I didn't understand it.
There is a weapon system that's Sierra Nevada Corporation is coming out with, and probably already has. It's called Medusa, and it's for crowd control, and it uses the microwave hearing effect at near ranges. And basically, you can't plug your ears. You can't stop it. The sound is being transmitted directly to the inner ear through small heating vibrations of the brain. And this was written up probably about 4 years ago that they were developing such a weapon. And there is one colonel that says, if you can transmit voices into the enemy's head, I will find a way to talk them to their death. So you can imagine what a useful weapon system that would be.
Okay. Now, how do they... We understand, part of it is to choose stronger victims, but when they want to experiment on this stuff, how do they choose their targets?
Go ahead, Dr. Hall.
Well, I'll give you my opinion on it, and I think it's pretty much random. If you look back historically at the way this research started, most of it was done through front companies or masked as legitimate research through universities. But at least having identified some of the perpetrator groups, with our research, what it appears to me is that the technology is being released to certain, if you want to call them criminal groups or people that are being allowed to have the technology with basically a carte blanche, open-ended invitation to victimize whoever they want to victimize for whatever reason. And I think that's how the powers that be that are actually taking down the data on how well it works are achieving their randomness to their experimentation. I think the individual groups that are being allowed to possess it are being told, victimize whoever you want to victimize. Because if you look across the board, it's certainly random. There's not, it's not one particular racial group. It's not one particular political group. Most of it are common people, housewives. It's not just whistleblowers and political activists. It's, most of the victims are just everyday middle-class people.
Okay. I have another question here. Can they also hear your thoughts while they are implanting their programming or while they're beaming you with something? Do they get feedback?
Absolutely. That's part of the technology that makes it so unbelievable. During hive mining, it's called. The very thought processes are bidirectional. And so you have to create a feedback loop in order for this technology to work. So the answer is a solid yes.
Okay, they can read my thoughts then to a certain extent during that process of beaming me. They're going to get back some kind of data from me, whether and it would be involuntary on my part.
That's right. That's right. In fact, you can even probe someone's dreams to get a more subconscious profile of their psychology.
Okay, that is truly horrific. Okay.
Well, you can understand why this is so top secret. The very concept of free will is destroyed. We've been debating this for thousands of years, and to have that argument finalized, well, all of Western philosophy, and from crime and punishment to religion, relies on this concept of free will. They can't just announce it and then say, oh, by the way, we've been running torture experiments on people all around the world. So they're going to be sure to keep this classified for as long as we can.
All right, let's look at the news. Egypt, could they intensify the riots with that gear that they have?
Absolutely, and in fact, it's a major war strategy is to try to get other countries to fight each other. And so you want to intensify the fighting to wage war of attrition. And then, of course, you could use a political maneuver, say that we're going to send in troops to occupy them to help stop the fighting. There are a whole bunch of reasons you'd want to do that. In 1970s, there was an Army intelligence officer that came forward and said the Russians were beaming us with a cyclotronic signal all over, and we started sending the same one back to them. But the signal was meant to subdue the population, keep them from becoming violent, and calm them down, as if we were the aggressors. So it can be used in either form, to calm a country's population down, or to incite violence as well. Another colonel said that with this particular radio frequency, he could instill white-hot anger in the subject. Well, that would be proof that they already have that technology, and have been, and of course would be using it in a warfare arena.
Yeah, and everywhere else. Could they do something like I read a term, mental rape? And the idea of one of these crimes would be in that kind of environment, used with a satellite for audio and visual. Could scientists, writers, military people, et cetera, have their intellectual property, like their plans or their theories or whatever, their papers, be stolen